Hi, everybody. Welcome to the webinar today. We're excited you're here. We're going to get started in about 1 minute. I see a lot of people jumping in right now. We've got a big group, so we'll give you 1 more minute to get settled, and then we'll get started. In the meantime, you're going to get to see Shaz and I just enjoying the silence. So we'll talk to you in 1 minute. All right, everybody, let's get started. Thank you for jumping on the webinar today. We're really excited you're here. Let me do a few housekeeping items as I welcome you and explain how this will work today. First, we know that the GoToWebinar event, we had to block out a 60-minute window. We don't intend on keeping you for 60 minutes, so you can get back to your day much more quickly. So we'll try to move through our presentation in 20 or so minutes and then take your questions for 10 to 15 minutes after that. Um, and uh, and get started there. The other thing I would mention is we do want to make sure we hear your feedback, that we are able to take questions. So you'll notice on the GoToWebinar screen at the very top, you're going to see a little question area with a question icon and a chat area. Just put your questions or comments in either of those locations, and we will make sure we address them as we go and also at the end. So please ask throughout the webinar and then also at the end as well. And then the other question we always get is this being recorded? It is. We'll make the recording available to you. Members of the team here at Vroozi will be reaching out today, tomorrow, and early next week, and they'll have that recording available, and we'll be able to share it with you as well. So with that, welcome to the webinar. The title today is 5 Common Mistakes that Companies Often Make with Their Procurement Processes. And our special esteemed guest is Shaz Khan, who's the CEO at Vroozi. So thanks for jumping on. We know you're busy. I know you were traveling earlier this week. Are you still in a hotel somewhere? Or are you back at home?
No, I'm in a hotel. We are getting some much needed rain here in Los Angeles. So
Oh,
just wrapping up some meetings for today.
great. And I'm your host. I'm McKay Allen, and we're excited to be here. So thanks for taking the time, everybody. We'll get started. So first and foremost, I think the first thing we want to talk a little bit about is Vroozi, like what we do, how we do it. And why don't we kind of let you walk through this slide, Shaz? Like talk to us about the business, the background, why you started it, and the pain point that Vroozi's trying to solve.
Happy to do so, McKay, and excited to be on this webinar today, speaking on this topic. Vroozi was founded in 2012. We're headquartered in Los Angeles, California. The primary mission of Vroozi is to consumerize B2B commerce transactions. So oftentimes companies are faced with complex purchasing decisions for their indirect spend of goods and services, but making those purchases becomes very complex, whether it's a very hard system to leverage or use or no system at all. There are really no clear channels or buying channels established to make those purchases happen. And so Vroozi's mission is to really consolidate, digitize processes so that you can enable an intelligent business marketplace, but more importantly, create bridges and communication channels between your corporate procurement, IT, and finance functions.
Got it. And that was, I'm sure, a challenge when you stepped into the marketplace and stepped into this world, was like seeing, and that's what we'll talk about today, is some of the mistakes you probably saw early on that led you to build Vroozi and talk to companies about how you can help them with this. That was kind of the impetus for the topic today, was some of these mistakes that businesses often make, right?
Correct. Yes. I mean, oftentimes when you look at these types of departments and initiatives that are taken to modernize enterprise applications, you are talking purely about business transformation. And oftentimes with some of these systems that we would put in previous lives, and what I would classify as the traditional big box ERP packages or financial systems, what was really apparent is those systems were great at integrating processes end to end. But where they fell short and continue to fall short is on the end user adoption.
Got it.
These types of activities should be very intuitive. In the advent of now AI, smart devices, smartphones should be able to actually access these applications to get what you need to do quickly and with quality.
Love that. And is there a certain industry that you find is a really good fit, or is it basically like, hey, if you have a procurement budget every year that's over X, it's a good fit regardless of industry? What do you find there typically?
I think industries can definitely be uh, cyclical based on macro and microeconomic conditions. And we're obviously seeing that play out right now with policies on reciprocal tariffs and tariffs being implemented.
Yeah.
But in terms of the industries that we see that are actually growing and requiring this integration between buyers and suppliers and providing more visibility, we look at manufacturing, we look at logistics, we look at chemicals and aerospace and defense, media, retail. These are companies that are not immune to economic pressures and need competitive advantages outside of just what they're selling to optimize their operating costs and business.
Love it. And then I love this slide as well because I think it provides a really clear way and to understand exactly where you guys fit into the ecosystem, right? Like it's about a system, it's about some of these intelligent integrations, it's about one platform where people can come in and democratize access to the things they need to do their job rather than individual POs and invoices and departments being siloed. And I'm guessing that's kind of your vision, right? Like make sure this is simple for the end user and also easy for the business leaders and the budgets and everything else.
Yeah, McKay, for us, it's really about democratization of access without sacrificing the business rules that companies have set forth. And so when you look at modern day enterprise applications, for us, it's about allowing companies to configure their experiences without having to go into complex IT coding cycles.
Yeah.
And then also wrapping with the advent of now AI, an intelligence layer across every aspect of your purchasing and payables process.
Mm,
Those become game changers for companies when they look at how they want to not only digitize, but also save on cost by increasing productivity through the roof.
love that. That's great. I think I'm sure we'll talk about this as we get into the mistakes here. You can see a list of the customers that Vroozi has. But it seems too like some businesses in the past, and I think that the attitude's probably changing, we're almost scared of democratization. We're almost scared of giving the end user, the end employee, too much power. Did you see that early on, and do you think that attitude's changing, or am I mistaken there?
Well, I think it is dependent upon the industry that you're in and what the business is trying to accomplish. But I've always seen this scenario play out. Chances are, if you're an employee at a company, you've had to request some type of product or service to do your job. And oftentimes, because of the prohibitive nature of licensing models with some of these systems, you can only give access to maybe 10% of your workforce. Uh, that I think is now changing where you can allow companies to touch the applications, provide access to employees, as long as you provide a rules framework where you can
Mm,
actually still have the compliance baked
that's,
in.
so democratization doesn't mean utter chaos. That's the
Not
key.
the wild, wild west or free for all,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. All right, so let's talk about these. We talked through these a few days ago, and I love these five. So let me just kind of briefly talk through these five, and then we'll dive into each one in more detail. So I should say as background, like this is with a ton of experience from you of saying, hey, look, as we've started to work with these businesses, as we've sort of surveyed the industry, as we've looked at procurement processes across multiple industries, these are the common mistakes that we see. So first is elongated approval chains. I could go off about that one because I've experienced as an end user, and it's just brutal. Lack of integration with third-party systems, unclear policies and procedures. Again, that one like makes me shudder a little bit. ignoring corporate finance processes, and then the limited access to contracts and pricing. So let's take a step and go through each of these a little bit. Elongated approval chains. Process is unclear and messy. Do we need three financial approvers for a $500 purchase? I have been on the end of that where um, it was. I'll give you a real life example. I was at a large IT software company probably 8 years ago as the head of marketing, and it was easier for me to go hire a full time employee on my team. Like the approvals were less than to go buy a relatively small piece of software for this $1 billion business that was like a $250 monthly subscription. It was, or get someone on my team a new laptop. Like getting approval to hire a full time head was less laborious than that very simple purchase. And that strikes me as what you're talking about here.
Absolutely. I think that companies should always revisit their approval chains and business rules related to corporate expenditures. And not to say that certain purchases do not require additional touches by individuals that might have more experience with those types of purchases. For example, if you're doing a very complex chemicals purchase to satisfy, your manufacturing plant, then you're going to require additional touches to validate that that chemical purchase is within contract, the right certifications are there, the right quality metrics are there on that purchase. However, oftentimes we see these approval chains which are unnecessarily elongated, and a lot of that relates to trust, the lack of systems and controls that are already in place, and the lack of forward thinking budgeting. And so when companies start looking at giving access to employees, they have to question, do I need to have employee in the manufacturing plant approving $15 invoices that might
Yeah.
not have a PO? And these are true stories that we see time and time again within large corporations. We have VPs of procurement, okay, heads of manufacturing plants that are receiving and inundated with approvals for $5, for
Crazy.
$20. And for those types of things, there should be a framework put in place in which you can streamline your spend limits for specific commodities. You can determine if something is a capex or opex. You can
Hmm.
determine the nature of the spend and then route it to the right individuals. But certainly, if you are in a 20-step approval process, which we have seen, for a purchase, you have to question, how am I going to get that order out the door when it's a time sensitive order and I have 20 people that need to touch it? Oh, and by the way, five of them are out of the office.
That's a great point. Is like even with more remote people, it actually gets worse. And then here's the other thing too, is like if you have a process that is elongated and awful and painful, all that person's going to do is just go outside of your process. Like they're going to make sure they're able to get their job done, and you're just not going to know that it was spent, and they're just going to submit it as a receipt to be reimbursed down the road. Like it's going to happen. You just have to like the process does not make the budget adherence more likely. In my experience, it makes it less likely because they're just going to go outside a process. I love the yellow box here on this slide where it says a longer process usually equates to a more expensive process. And I think that's counterintuitive. I think people are like, man, we need all these approvals to save us money. In reality, it costs you money.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at core metrics that companies should be benchmarking when they look at their procurement and payables processes, you have certain elements of a cost per purchase order. You have elements of cycle time. And these are all metrics that you are looking to decrease, not
Hmm.
increase. And when you see these types of elongated approval cycles, both of those metrics start shooting up quite
Yes.
considerably, which removes the productivity play throughout.
Interesting. That's a great one. This one is so important in my opinion. All right. Lack of integration with third-party systems and data. really integrating the ERP and financial systems that helps with financial controls, visibility, but then also collaboration with suppliers and trading partners. So one of the things I love about Vroozi is how simple it makes this because of your integrations with so many suppliers to begin with. Um, but talk a little bit about this mistake and where you generally see it in the process.
Well, I think when you look at the integration framework, what's going to happen in the next 5 years when you have employees that can come to a corporate app store to basically select the applications for their business function, and then all of those applications automatically communicate with each other without requiring any type of heavy integration because they're already pre-built connectors. That
Mm,
is where the future is going. And when we look at lack of integration, I always counsel companies to look at three aspects. First and foremost, their ERP and financial systems of record, which house the chart of accounts and the accounting structures, which need to be embedded within a procurement process. You need to be knowing where you're going to be expensing your line items to, which GL
mm,
accounts, which cost objects. The second element, which is a very critical element, is your supplier population. When you think of your major spend categories or your tail spend, there are a lot of suppliers that have digital bridges already built for document transmission and document interchange. How do you take advantage of that as a company? How do you
mhm,
connect with those suppliers in preferred formats such that the supplier gains the benefit of not having to key in a purchase order as a sales order manually? And how do you, as a company, gain benefit from contracted pricing? And then, third, is this notion of other systems that are part of the procure to pay value chain. These could be payment systems. These could be inventory asset management systems. These could be Active Directory for your employee population and where your workflow rules are stored. All of these systems should be looked at, should be integrated, should communicate because they extend the value chain of your systems and technology. And I'll ask one more point. The ability to capture additional data elements is, I think, a big gap today in the supply chain. When you look at your supplier population, how integrated and smart are your buying organization and folks on the supplier themselves? What capabilities do they provide? What certs do they have? What diversity objectives are they meeting? And what's their cybersecurity posture? Just to give an example, on cybersecurity, McKay, which I think is absolutely critical
huge.
when you look at these systems. January 2025 was the highest recorded uh, record of cybersecurity attacks throughout the world in
Crazy.
January. Okay. And it's only increasing, it's
Yep.
becoming more sophisticated. And so, how do you know your supply chain is secure? Right? You have to be vetting out those suppliers and gaining those informational assets so you can gain peace of mind in your supply chain. It's not just the actual products or the quality, it's also that cybersecurity posture where your data could be exposed.
That's interesting. So there's so many reasons for this. It's convenience, it's budget adherence, but it's also security, which I think is great to point out. Um, okay, unclear policies and procedures. Um, do I need a credit card, a purchase order, an invoice? Who's in charge of this? Is this department specific? I've worked at companies before where they had somebody on the finance team at one of my companies who thought he was really good at negotiating. And so every deal over a certain size had to go through that person for negotiation of price. It's just, it was very unclear when it needed to be sent to that person. So this to me is like, is the solution to this to write them down? Or like, what is the actual solution to this problem? Because I would guess this is a really common problem.
Well, it's funny as we are a software vendor and we like to remove paper. In this instance, I would highly recommend some level of documentation and
Right.
writing down. levels of policies and procedures in which you can decide as an organization what requires a purchase order, what does not require a purchase order, what can be paid on a credit card or a virtual credit card. But more importantly, what did that upstream process look like in terms of the negotiation process, the evaluation process for identifying potential suppliers and gaining a negotiation exercise? And what are you looking at in terms of the CapEx and OpEx purchases? Who makes the decisions about purchasing? All of these things need to be looked at. Now, when you write these policies and procedures down, how do you make those policies and procedures baked into a software offering such that
Yeah.
the user is guided and does not make mistakes? So for a very clear example, when you log into a system, the system will tell you, well, this requires a purchase order, or this item can be paid by a virtual credit card. And so what you're doing is you're taking the data that you wrote in terms of the governance of your system as it relates to corporate procurement and finance, but then you're leveraging systems with an AI powered business workflow and rules engine to memorialize and bring those to life to the end user. So you take the
So if
guessing
I'm
game out.
hearing you correctly, one of the things we've talked about the integrations, we've talked about some of the democratization functionalities of Vroozi. But if I'm hearing you correctly, it also is a way for policies kind of to be baked into the procurement process. So it's not just like separately living in a Google Doc somewhere. Is that right? Am I hearing you correctly on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that if you look at companies, oftentimes we find companies saying, well, what's my benchmarking? What's my KPIs? What are my policies and procedures related to procurement? Oh, I have that somewhere.
Yeah,
Well, where?
yeah, yeah. No one knows. Some
No,
well-meaning person like 5 years ago created it. No one knows where it is.
that's right. Your policies and procedures need to live past the people, is
Yep,
the real point. They need to be revisited on an annualized basis, just like an employee handbook from an
yep.
HR standpoint. Same thing related to your corporate finance and procurement functions.
Cool. And then number four, ignoring corporate finance processes. So in many businesses, there are massive barriers between specific departments and procurement or accounts payable or the finance department more broadly. And there's not a ton of visibility. And it depends. What I've seen too is I it's like controller roulette or head of finance roulette, where like this kind of works well if you've got the right person in place, but it shouldn't actually be dependent on that. Like you need just processes that are independent of the people in charge of that function. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think that this is an area that we're seeing actually dramatic improvement
That's
also
awesome.
within our experiences in the sense that procurement, corporate finance, the controllership, treasury, cash management, they're all integrating. They're not siloed functions anymore. However, with a number of companies, that's just the reality that they're continuing to silo functions in the sense that you can basically have all of these what we call surprise shadow purchases or after the fact orders and invoices show up on people's desk, which is a controllership's nightmare. If you're seeing all of this spend, that's going to go hit your bottom line,
Yeah.
right? Where you didn't have that visibility to those commitments before. And so it's imperative when companies are looking at their procurement capabilities and their policies and how they roll out their strategies as it relates to corporate procurement of indirect and direct, is to make sure corporate finance, ARAP, tax, all are available and all are having a say in the process that is end to end. Because ultimately, when you're executing a procurement process, you are spending money first and
Yep.
foremost. And then you are paying a supplier with some type of modality that you could gain preference on. And so to know your supply chain, to know whether suppliers can be paid early, um, both sides, procurement, IT, finance, should know that. All of that
Yep.
data should be visible across the supply chain because it makes a stronger value chain as it relates to the end payables process.
I love that. Awesome. And then number five, limited access to contracts and pricing. So are you referring here in this for this mistake once they're filled out, like once things are actually negotiated, like finding old stuff? Um, so yeah, limited or no visibility of preferred pricing to designated employees. So resulting in rogue off contract purchasing. I've seen that. Lack of controls and access creates a wild fluctuation in price variances. Contracts stuffed in a drawer after they're negotiated and signed. That's a big one. It's a huge issue. Where have you seen this? Like, is this getting better or worse? Like, talk to us about this one a little bit.
I think for certain spend categories, McKay, we're seeing it improve. However, for the most part, there's some really great activities that happen on the upstream side of procurement when it relates to the negotiation process, the evaluation process, memorializing contracts, getting them through the legal authoring workflows so that you have a ready-made contract. What happens, unfortunately, after the contract is that there is no integration of that contract with pricing, with service capabilities, with statement of work into your downstream procurement processes. So your corporate procurement might have visibility to the contract, but your downstream employee in the manufacturing plant, on the shop floor, within the
Yep.
corporate office has no idea that this contract was executed. And that supplier is absolutely critical for their business needs. And so now you have this dangerous game of roulette where that employee just goes off on their own and says, I will do my own negotiation
Yep.
process. And I might not vet that supplier according to the standards because I don't know that the supplier existed in the first place in my ecosystem. And so this lack of controls, lack of visibility creates incredible maverick scenarios of purchasing and also wide varieties of fluctuation and price variances. We just finished an exercise with a large company that we work with in which they're in the agriculture sector and they had multiple farms buying the same product at three different price points.
Oh, you. That's not that uncommon though. To your point, like I've seen it even in different departments where even um, I have seen the same vendor being used in different departments at the same location, and they don't even know that another department's using the same vendor. Like, there's that little of communication, right? The same vendor has basically two contracts with the same company doing precisely the same thing or something that's slightly different. So that's really interesting about that agricultural company. That's not uncommon, I guess is my point.
It's table stakes. When you look at systems, you must look at the cleansing of the data as well.
Yeah. And
Oftentimes,
so
you might see a supplier. Yeah,
well, and with Vroozi, it has the ability to tell you, like, hey, this company already has a contract with us. They're already providing us this. So as you look things up internally, it's going to solve this problem for you up front, I'm guessing, right? It's going to tell you precisely, like, hey, there's another department or another location that's already using this vendor, and here's what they're doing.
that's exactly right. That's exactly right. Providing that visibility, also identifying duplicates, identifying areas for data cleanup and cleansing. These are all important things when you look at your strategy to not only make your suppliers alive in the supply chain, but make sure you have the right supplier that you're
Yes,
displaying to your end users.
love that. Well, this is awesome. We've got just a few like reviews from Vroozi's raving fans here. Like the thing that I will say is we didn't do this on purpose, to be honest, but there's a lot of things that are mistakes that we've gone through that simply implementing Vroozi will solve, and that's our hope is that we can help you do that. Is this the best way for people to reach out to you? Just email you directly and ask you questions about any of this?
Yeah, I'm always available via email and happy to take questions from the participants.
Cool. So we've got a few questions here. So go to the top, everybody, in the question area or the chat area, and we'll answer your questions as they come in. So Eric asked a good question. He said, we have an integration challenge for a subcontractor in our pre-qualification process. We use SAP. We use a company called Vertical for subcontractor pre-qualification. We created a Power BI for procurement to get a quick view between platforms, but this has been really challenging for data extraction. It kind of says what you were saying is it feels like there's a lot of tools being used there that are sort of put together. Um, it might need a more comprehensive solution, but I'll let you take that one, Shaz.
And I'm sorry, McKay, what was the question as it relates to?
Just like how do you combat those integration issues? Just like what do you do when you have that scenario? How do you, yeah, the exact question is how do you combat these integration issues I've described?
I think first and foremost, you have to have a very solid idea of what you're trying to accomplish from a data mapping standpoint. And oftentimes, when you talk about integrations, you're talking about data that is going to move from one system to the other. But here's the real challenge that we see integrations. You might have more fields prevalent in one system or one data mapping file than the other system can support.
Oh,
And
interesting.
so the first area that I would really guide is not necessarily the technical integration capabilities, but what are you trying to accomplish from a data mapping and data storage standpoint within the systems? Do you want your subcontractor data to be made available within SAP or vice versa, additional data elements, and then execute the integration strategy? Everything is moving, as we all know, from an integration standpoint to APIs, right? Both batch and real time. But I think what we'll see in the next 3 to 4 years is a lot of these integration challenges will actually become much easier. Systems will communicate much easier based on these lightweight APIs that can allow for this communication channel to be open.
Cool. And then a couple more here. What are you seeing change here? What changes are you seeing post COVID with a more remote workforce? What problems has that presented? What challenges, but also what opportunities does that present?
Look, the COVID exposed a lot as it relates to how companies can react very quickly from moving from office policy to a remote or hybrid standpoint. And oftentimes, what we saw is companies were not ready. They were not ready to provision devices to have their employees take them and use those devices for their business needs. Even something as simple as provisioning a laptop became a challenge for a lot of companies. And why is that important? Because you need to also have a multimodal, multi-device strategy to allow for enterprise application access. And what does that mean? Allowing for mobile capabilities for your employees to execute certain functions. So if you need an invoice to be approved, you can have a user go through a single sign-on process on their phone, but then they can actually approve that invoice right from their smartphone. That is speed. That is productivity, all wrapped around compliance. And so I think what we've seen is an advent of mobile capabilities for the remote and hybrid workforce, which is becoming more imperative as you look at these types of value chains: order to cash, procure to pay, finance, settle to close.
Okay. And then Craig asked an interesting question here, and I'm going to state it just the way he asked it because I'm not sure what he's getting at. So maybe, Craig, if you can add a little more detail to your question. Do you have to be on a contract purchasing process for Vroozi to work? In other words, do you have to have a process or system done in a certain way for Vroozi to be like beneficial to your business?
Oh, great question. Short answer is no. So Vroozi allows companies to memorialize all their contracts in a digital consumer-like marketplace. However, oftentimes we have many categories that are not memorialized in contracts. And so you can actually put all types of requests through Vroozi, whether they are contract purchases or off contract purchases. You can also embed different sets of approvers on an off contract purchase. You might have a sourcing or compliance workflow requirement for an off contract purchase. So it's very flexible. And the key thing for us is that we want to limit the requirement to go in and do all this custom coding. We're a no code framework. So your experiences should be configured, not customized.
Ooh, I
That's
like
a big
that.
thing for us.
I like that. And then finally, one last question here. Assuming you're a source to pay suite, any sequence you would recommend in which Vroozi should be implemented? So, would you do P2P, for example? Like, would you like where would you implement this in terms of the sequence and the structure?
I think for Vroozi is an absolute procure to pay end-to-end suite with many distinct modules. You can modularize the actual application set. So if you have corporate finance AP capabilities that are advanced, that you just want to add the e-requisitioning, e-procurement, we're a very modular platform. But if you
Cool.
want a complete integrated end-to-end process with matching capabilities on your invoice, with non-PO ingestion, with an AI intelligence engine for account coding, you can also look at that value offering end-to-end as well. And so
Love that.
typically we'll see companies that will come downstream after they've negotiated their contracts. Now they want to make their contracts alive for their employee population.
Cool. Well, this is great. Thank you so much for taking the time, and everybody, thank you for the questions. That makes it more fun. Um, when we have questions and when we have like engagement, it makes it more interesting for us. There's actually one more here. Let me read this very last one, and I've said the last one twice, but this one's for real. This really will be the last one. What are the methodologies that can be applied to evaluate new vendors? Not only the relay and not only relying on these submitted proposals. So methodologies you recommend to evaluate a new vendor.
Boy, that's a good one, and it probably would
We could do a
deserve
whole
a
webinar about that, couldn't we?
it probably deserve a longer, more thoughtful response. But I think, look, I think the nature of the questions that you should be asking potential suppliers that also meet what your business objectives are as it relates to, whether you are looking at diversity, small business spend, whether you're looking at sustainability initiatives. I think a big area right now where companies are really focusing on is what are the security postures of your supply chain and supply base that absolutely must be added into the mix so that you can also measure your supplier risk on an ongoing basis. A lot of great tools that do that. Vroozi is not really a risk mitigation platform as it relates to suppliers, but does integrate with some services. And those are the things that we would recommend to
Cool.
start looking at as you evaluate your supply chain.
Love that. Well, awesome. Thanks again. Thanks so much for jumping on, everybody. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. As I said, someone from Vroozi will reach out to you and provide you with the recording. We'd also love to do a demo with you and show you if this is going to, determine if this is going to help your business and your procurement process. So watch for that phone call and email from people on our team who are asking about that. Shaz, any final thoughts from you before we jump off?
I just enjoyed the conversation. I hope the participants enjoyed the conversation on this Thursday, and we're here to help. Obviously, we have a end-to-end suite, but we also like to bring in our thoughts and predictions and prognostications on the market and see how we can help advance companies to the next level.
Cool. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a fantastic day and a great rest of the week. Bye bye.
Thank you.